Should I just go? Hi guys, good morning. Good afternoon pala. That just goes to show how I haven't really slept and how nervous I am today. Because to be honest, with the preparation of Anthology over the last couple of weeks, I literally just finished writing my lecture like half an hour ago. So hopefully though, you will learn a thing or two today from what I have to share over the experiences that we've accumulated since we started the practice 5 years ago. Oh yeah, my mom has special request. So thank you guys for all coming because I thought the only person who would be here is my mom. So thanks for coming out. But she has a special request. So she specifically said, sa tanan ng mga taga Cebu ug taga Cagayan de Oro, thank you so much for flying all the way to Manila to be here. So oftentimes we forget the frequency with which we come in contact with architecture. From the moment we wake up, throughout our experiences throughout the day, leaving our homes, walking through alleys, streets, parks, and getting to school or work, and to the moment we seek shelter for a night's sleep, we come in contact with architecture. Architecture is the most public and socially dangerous art. We can switch off the television or close a book, move a painting, but we cannot ignore our built environment. We each spend 90% of our waking lives in contact with buildings, and sometimes, stating the obvious refocuses how important architecture is in each of our lives, and how important it is for each of us to think about architecture. Where do I point? So, my first memory of architecture is probably my oldest memory. I grew up in this brutalist building. My dad's office was on the 3rd floor, and my family and I lived on the 6th floor. Legazpi Towers on the Boulevard, as it was once called, was the brainchild of the architect Antonio Mercado, completed in 1980, a decade just before I was born. The lobby had a 4-story atrium, topped with a skylight that was a first of its time, instilling in me an appreciation for light and shadow, form and mass. And directly across from this is Leandro Locsin's masterpiece. The Cultural Center of the Philippines. Every day, I would take my bike across the street. I would go up and down and around the ramp, or play in the plaza. Where do I point? Huh? Here? It doesn't work. Sorry, guys. Okay, there we go. So, every day I would take my bike across the street and I would go up and down the ramp here, and I would play in the front and in the rear, where I would eventually meet my friends, one of my best friends until today. And unbeknownst to me then, this would be my first understanding of how architecture is primarily about people. The buildings architects create are mere backdrops for life, giving architects themselves the power to create places where people raise their families, fall in love, make lifelong relationships, and aspire toward the better, showing me at a very young age how architecture can engage. People are the lifeblood of a community, relationships the lifeblood of stories. And as stories, relationships, and humanistic endeavors shape humanity, these also shape the architecture that shapes us. Many years later, I would find myself moving 7,000 miles away to the United Kingdom, where I would spend 6 years training in architecture. I first lived in the city of Bath, and it's one of the earliest cities in the UK. Bath is known for and named after the Roman built baths established in 60 AD. After it was named Britain's one and only UNESCO World Heritage City in the 20th century, no building was to be built in anything other than limestone, preserving the heritage and the culture of the city. It is probably no surprise then that my ideologies in architecture are deeply rooted in contextualism, creating buildings reflecting changing technology and the zeitgeist, the spirit of the age. This is the building where I spent most of my waking days and sleepless nights. It was called 6 East, the University of Bath's Architecture and Engineering Department by Alan and Peter Smithson. It was completed in the 1960s when brutalism gained considerable momentum after the war, when communities sought inexpensive and raw construction methods, and its modular elements contrast dramatically to the highly defined and refined and ornamented style of the Beaux-Arts. Together with other members of the Modern Architecture Research Group, also known as MARS, which was essentially a younger and more radical version of Le Corbusier's Congrès International Architecture de Moderne, the Smithsons attacked and increasingly formalized an international style and adopted by the old guards, and also tore into new contextualism. Though this isn't exactly the world's prettiest building, the Smithsons' ideologies were less about aesthetic and more about intent. The Smithsons were determined that the building itself should be as much lesson as a teaching that would take place inside of it. The modern concrete forms of the roofline and the courses between floors were all informed by the string of courses and cornices of historic Palladian Bath. This walkway, ascending into the heart of the campus, is where students arrive. And it is very explicit in its form. No hallway was ever straight. The varying widths over every couple of meters created small niches to encourage conversation as one walked past another, and columns and beams were expressed and utilities exposed, serving as the visual reference for architecture and engineering students who inhabited the building pretty much 24/7. In fact, it was the only building that was open 24/7 on campus. Through this everyday experience, I understood that buildings should be underpinned by a powerful idea. That the idea should be an intelligent and logical response to functionality and a sense of place. And the power of that idea should be embedded in built form. Now, in post-war Europe, another challenge to modernism was emerging from Cedric Price. Cedric was a subtle, radical, and considerable thinker. He saw architecture as a way of responding to the rapid changes of a post-industrial society, teaching a generation to challenge the brief and question what clients really, really wanted, while trying to find ways to bring delight. He devised the Fun Palace, although it was never built. It was a mobile home for arts and sciences constructed of movable and modular plugins. So essentially, the floors could move and all of that. Again, this was never built, but it was the precursor to the Centre Pompidou, which is the early work of Richard Rogers and Renzo Piano. Now, my discovery of Cedric Price in my final year of university was very instrumental in laying down the foundations of what I felt was truly important to me, and that was using my chosen profession to improve life, both for myself and for future generations to come. As I began to delve deeper into architecture, I realized that the power of architecture extends much further than the dimensions of individual buildings. In fact, architecture can enable and ennoble. Now, of the 7.5 billion people in the planet, nearly 4 billion people live in cities. That's half the world's population and more than lived on the entire planet in 1970. By 2050, there will be 9.8 billion people in the planet, and cities are expected to house 2/3 of the world's population. With that, it is estimated that there's going to be twice as much meat and dairy consumed. And with that, there will be an unprecedented number of arable land that will be grazed, resulting in also an unprecedented number of carbon emissions. Therefore, if meat and urbanism are rising hand in hand, that's going to pose an enormous problem, and yet we often forget to ask the question, how do we feed our cities? Where does the role of architecture lie in feeding the world's population, and how are we going to prepare our urban cities to feed 6 billion hungry carnivores in 2050? How do we provide a sanitary system in the exchange of food? Though this is a topic that can take hours and days to discuss, I was determined to learn more about and address this looming issue with architecture as a vehicle by addressing the marketplace. As my university thesis, I worked on the redevelopment of the public market for the neighboring city of Bristol. This was a product of my wider interest in the social realm of the issues that we face today. Now, the existing Bristol market is only open from Thursdays to Sundays. It's empty and underutilized throughout the rest of the week. I found it deeply bothersome that prime real estate was not reaching its full potential. So the proposed Bristol market was rooted in the idea of creating an adaptable building, one that served the primary purpose of being a market but did not rigidly determine the way it would be used, allowing people to adapt and interact with the space, to bring life and to complete the expression of a building. In doing such, I learned to be functional and pragmatic, to use strategy and not a design solution. I don't subscribe to styles. Styles are like fashion and they wane over time. However, I do believe in using an analytical and an open-ended approach that produces responsive and intelligent architecture. Now, this is my college work. With a bold and straightforward box form, the market is housed under a trussed roof with modular stalls that could be retracted when no longer in use for food display and positioned differently for other uses. A concert, a movie screening, a sporting event, you name it. I was deeply inspired by Cedric Price's ideas. The scheme addresses a fast-changing world using contemporary technologies to create an open-ended, flexible building, rather than conforming to the traditional techniques of built-in obsolescence. In all of this, I realized that architecture needs to become much broader, to encompass everything from the structures of society to the nature of materials, so that architects can help create better shelter and better cities. In doing so, we are able to find better solutions to address climate change and inequality, two of the most pressing issues of our generation. It is imperative that we move toward a built environment sensitive to climate change and the depletion of scarce resource. So the idea here was the market stalls would come up and down. We had to do all sorts of studies and maquettes, but essentially this is what it would look like. Now, the ideas I gathered in the time I spent abroad, I brought home with me, and I share with my colleagues today, in the same and equal way that they share with me different ideas from each of their unique experiences. This is our team of professionals in constant search of finding better ways of working. Innovation is as much about finding simpler ways of doing things better as it is about finding new things to do. I take pride in our flat structure. The ideas of the newest employee are equally as important as that of our longest tenured colleague. However, I don't really think of anybody I work with as an employee. I have always wanted to have, and to be around people who also want to have, a life full of meaningful work and meaningful relationships. And to me, a meaningful relationship is one that is open and honest in a way that lets people be straight with each other. What I value most is the process of how we do things. We are functionalists, and we are not idly blown by the changing winds of fashion. At Plaza and Partners, we believe that it is an iterative process that begins with a clear definition of a brief, and it is constantly refined over time. We believe in contemporary design for a changing world, and we approach this with a radical open-mindedness and radical transparency, also expressed in the feedback loop. At the start of a project, we lay all parameters and challenge ideas with brutal honesty, acknowledging that at one point or another we might be wrong, but it's part of the learning process. Learning is the product of a continuous real-time feedback loop in which we make decisions, see their outcomes, and improve our understanding of reality as a result. Now, being radically open-minded enhances the efficiency of these feedback loops because it makes what you are doing and why so clear to yourself and others that there cannot be any misunderstandings. Most misunderstandings come about actually as a lack of communication. Being radically transparent and radically open-minded accelerates this learning process. It can be difficult because being radically transparent exposes you to criticism. It is natural to fear that. But if you don't put yourself out there with radical transparency, you won't learn. Now, coming back to Asia was something I seemingly thought would not be as much of a shock because I was only away for just short of 7 years. I departed my life in the UK out of London Heathrow's Terminal 5 by Norman Foster, and on en route home, I flew through the same architect's Beijing airport, which was designed and constructed in only 4 years. An absolutely astonishing feat. The Beijing airport was completed in 2008 in time for the Olympics, and it is the product of a strong-willed determination and a reflection of changing times and rapid urbanization. With 50,000 construction workers working around the clock, the Beijing airport is much larger than all 5 terminals of Heathrow combined. It only took Heathrow 20 years to design and build, and this is an important fact that I would later better understand and come to terms with. Now, Plaza and Partners began in 2015 with a string of supermarkets that needed to be completed in what seemed to me an out-of-this-world timeline. My team and I were given literally 5 weeks to complete a drawing package from schematic design all the way through contract documentation. We only had 5 months to oversee construction. That to me seemed entirely out of this world. After several years away, I was fresh out of London and I was working at John McCaslin and Partners. This was actually the first project I touched my hands on, and it was at the finishing stages and end of completion of the King's Cross station in London, which took over a decade to build. And eventually, I worked on the redevelopment of the Natural History Museum. This project started in the office in 2013. It is now 2020, and I literally checked last night. It hasn't even gotten past planning permission stage. At that time, I was overseeing our first supermarket. I felt like a bucket of cold water was thrown onto my face. The culture shock was both a huge reality check and an eye-opener. I had only really witnessed Asian growth from afar or read about these things in books or in the news, and I never actually experienced it firsthand. Adjusting was hard at first, but I came to know and accept that for all the architects, there is no better place to be in the world right now than in growing economies and developing nations, because it is these that need architects most. Now, the experience of working on supermarkets was a commercial reality of everything I had discovered about food and the trade of food in my university years. So the opportunity to work on Harvest Marketplace, a brand of private markets around Cavite, was extremely exciting in every possible way. The client actually approached me for a hotel project. But after learning more about each other, speaking about our ideas, thoughts on architecture, and other societal issues, we got to conversations about markets, their unrealized potential, and their underexplored value. It was exciting to see how he saw things differently from the way that I did, training me to look at things through the eyes of others as well as that of my own. That allowed me to see many more dimensions than if I had just seen things through my own eyes, broadening the process of how we approach work that comes our way at Plaza Partners. I personally wonder that if the societal role that markets play in our lives is so vital, then why do most of our markets in our country look like this? We deserve so much more. And in almost every other city that I can think of abroad, the marketplace not only inspires, but is also a strong attraction for tourism. Now, after a few meetings, I somehow infected my client with the same passion to improve the marketplace, and all of a sudden, our business meetings extended from the hotel to an ambitious goal to build a group of private markets around Cavite. 2 have been built, 3 I think will still go along the way. Together, we wanted to create a place for all people, Aside from your home, your workplace, the market is a place that we all visit. Some every day, others every other day, and even if you cook even if you don't cook or infrequently visit the market, the food in restaurants still come through markets. So to gain a better understanding of the local typology, my team and I spent hours in markets all over the country observing the movement of all users, both market goers and vendors, from the stalls to the back of house. So we began by deconstructing the typical wet market stall and understanding the movement of butchers and fishmongers. We each needed adequate space to move around, a clean counter for sanitation, a water source, and cold storage. The counters needed to complement their display and drain out excess water and ice. And truly understanding the movement within a market took several interviews with market goers, vendors, market administration, and many, many days of observation inside these markets. Now, in hindsight, what this process personified is that architecture is highly, highly collaborative. Building a great city is a product of collaboration of architects, engineers, community workers, planners, landscape designers, surveyors, government officials, and policymakers. It is enriched by the interplay between different disciplines from sociology and philosophy, engineering and horticulture, political science and economics, and most of all, by the collaboration between an enlightened client and the design team. It is about collective action and not individual heroics of all stakeholders involved, and it is about truly creating a place for all people. Now, to place people at the core of the urban planning narrative is always where we begin in responding to a brief, and that is how we approach the Bukidnon Sports and Cultural Complex in Malaybalay. Now, the plot of land we were working with was essentially tabula rasa. It is located 12 kilometers away from the city center. The complex is the provincial government's flagship project that will host the Palarong Pambansa, the annual Kaamulan Festival, and other provincial activities. Now, as a whole, the complex would serve as a catalyst for a greater sports master plan for the province of Bukidnon. This initiative will encourage people to exercise regularly, which can help reduce the incidence of strokes, cancer, depression, resulting in higher productivity and in lower healthcare costs. The initial brief was to include a whole wide range of facilities, an aquatic center, a gymnasium, a stadium, dormitories, and the government had put together a program to enable the people of Bukidnon and the general Mindanaoans to pursue excellence in sport. Now, while the sports platform is the complex's primary purpose, it was imperative to ensure that we did not create a white elephant, something that would be underutilized when sports are off-season. So we experimented with combining form and program. In the past, power over space lay with royalty, aristocracy, and religion as manifested in the grand cathedrals, glamorous palaces, and colossal castles. However, as we move toward the model of power and control exercised by one supreme entity toward the energy of people, it is important that the national government shares with local governments how we can create cities for the best interest of its people. In our design process, we sought to answer the question, how can architecture encourage public and candid activity? As a government project funded by the people of Bukidnon, how could we give the people of Bukidnon, every single taxpayer, including the non-athlete, the senior citizen, the handicapped, another venue to enjoy? We explored breaking down the massive structures to carve out places of congregation and places that encouraged community activity. That gave birth to habitable roofline and the urban plazas around the scheme. With this, we are able to provide the people of Bukidnon a platform to engage with their community, and the government a platform to engage with their people. Here, the individual is able to return to public life and contribute to society. Here, the government is able to serve its people, recapturing waning levels of trust in our government. The people who use our building aren't just the people inside or the people on the street, but the global population of consumers who clamor for the newest images of the most advanced buildings and spaces. Buildings don't just reflect our society, but they shape our society. The architectural aspect of this project strives to empower people to engage with others, to produce memorable experiences, and to live with a sense of wonder. Now, monumentality and simplicity are characteristics that have resonated throughout the work I have done, perhaps greatly influenced by my early interaction with architecture. Built in the 1960s, Leandro Locsin completed this house immediately after the CCP. So it is probably no surprise that this bungalow, with a pitched roof with a 6-meter cantilever, was double the height of the structure itself. As a product of the same time, but hugely different scales, this house was not dissimilar in elements to that of the CCP, in monumentality and graceful lyricism of line and motif. I came across this house in 2016, and back then, the house looked every bit its age. A young client had purchased this house from its original owners, not for the house itself, but primarily for the property value and its prime location. As the client showed it to me for the first time, he explained his grand plans to build his dream home on this property from scratch. I listened, but I already knew from the back of my head that knocking this house down would be sacrilege. So after several site visits and a careful review of the merits of this design and its value as a precious legacy by the national artist Leandro Locsin, and incessant explanations of the value of such, he finally agreed to just keep the house. And maybe it's actually just the magic words that clients love to hear, whether true or not. It will be cheaper, is what convinced him. Now, completed in 1968 as the first and only house on the street in the newly incorporated Dasmariñas village, the house was very much a reflection of the zeitgeist, a time when the enclave had recently been converted from marshland. The original house was entered through an open driveway, comfortably shaded by a massive cantilevered roof. Responsive to the conditions of that time, the solid external walls along the perimeter gave thermal mass to the house, which programmatically looked inward. There were very few, if any at all, neighboring structures within the vicinity, and back then it was probably always why the house was a lot cooler and far more far brighter. Now, several years later, the house no longer stands in isolation, with no shortage of neighbors in any direction. The house lies at the crossroads of the country's major business districts, with BGC on the east and the Makati CBD on the west. As the vicinity has now evolved ever so significantly through the years, the client was very specific in wanting a home that very much felt like a resort, an oasis that he could retreat to after a long day through the hustle and bustle of work. The challenge at hand was not so much changing the program, but instead working with the house as it was found and upgrading certain elements to be relevant to both the new owner and contemporary ways of living that would last another lifetime. This brief would be achieved with the idea of creating a more permeable skin, allowing the outdoors to emanate into the interior, and through a conscious selection of materiality to bring material into presence from the physical into the metaphysical world. I felt strong reverence toward keeping Locsin's original program, so our only major change was to treat the backyard as a courtyard, moving the house's center of gravity from the living room over to the garden. By removing solid partitions that separated the indoor and outdoor, the living room was extended towards the lanai, accommodating a casual dining and entertainment setup. This extension is separated by transparent glass of bifolding doors that open up to a panoramic vista of the garden and swimming pool from the living room that the client absolutely loved. Now, the ubiquity of the brick cladding over the walls gave it a rather dark and dated tectonic. So it was important to keep the original material, but it was also the reason that it was so dark inside. And so what I decided instead was to keep the adobe only in the structural elements to sort of signify the original structure of the building. Apart from being pragmatic, I felt that retaining the structural walls was symbolic in the sense that the structural elements have kept that house standing for the last half century and will serve as the DNA for another 50 years. An odd feature of the house was an odd balcony overlooking the living room. The balcony spanned the length of the room and it was inaccessible. Locsin had apparently designed the house to eventually accommodate a second floor that the previous owners never got to build, which explains the height of the roof. I chose to remove the balcony and close it off to emphasize the height ceiling and the living room for additional storage. Access to the supposed second floor was reinforced with steel beams and converted into a storage area, and we just provided a drop-down ladder so that it could be accessed. To break the ubiquity of the adobe in the dining, we clad some walls with a brown slate, which we actually sourced from the side of the road in Bukidnon. Now, recognition of the house's strong elements enabled me to re-envision a home that remains faithful to the original program, but relevant to the new owner. I like to use a little quote from The Little Prince. "Perfection is not achieved when there is nothing more to add, but when there is nothing left to take away." Locsin was well ahead of his years in creating architecture with timeless form and function. Half a century later, his understanding of space and program is still very much relevant. The process was more to do with about creating a home relevant for the next 50 years. Now, that very idea of timelessness was a driving factor for our practice's entry to the competition to design the new Supreme Court that would be relocated from Ermita, Manila to BGC. The Supreme Court represents an institution that is strong and resolute and unwavering in the face of turmoil and controversy. The shape of the site was triangular, and it is with which we drew parallels. Like a pyramid in equilibria, the idea is that the Supreme Court will correct itself to steady and stable state after any external movement. It is in this view that we build our vision around the image of the pyramid, the shape of which is inspired by the imagery that the institution mandates. For hundreds, if not thousands of years, generations before us have fought for equality, liberty, and the dignity of the individual. These principles have created a society that has never before been as energized, educated, and healthy as it is that of today. Never before have we known so much, cared so much, or wanted to achieve so much. However, in the sense of individual importance with emerging society, this has ironically led us to an increased sense of personal perspective and the need to protect oneself, causing us to become increasingly distrustful of our neighbors and the community around us. In his book, The Fall of Public Man, Richard Sennett exposed the decline of the community in the bourgeois world, the antisocial retreat to privacy in which he associates with narcissism. In addressing the brief for the Supreme Court, we asked ourselves, how can architecture mediate between the government and the governed to harness equality and mutual trust? How can architects design to engage the will, involvement, and support of the nation, then translate this into a physical manifestation? From the ancient Greek agora to the 12th century Roman palazzo, to the series of halls of justice erected in contemporary time, the typology of such an edifice has always provided a space for the building users to express their personal beliefs and afford them space in which he can better perform his civic duty for the community. The typology itself does not possess an inherent power to provide solutions to all of these social dilemmas, but it is not improbable to contend that architects have the capacity to utilize such architecture as a tool to embody a worldly spirit of freedom, reason, self-consciousness, and recognition. This project was an opportunity for us. This project was an opportunity for us to use architecture to provide a vision for leadership on how to shape participatory spaces where people feel able to express themselves. Now, in every project that we approach at Plaza Partners, we look at precedent. By understanding the past, critically interrogating existing solutions, learning from foregoing and current thinking, new ideas arise, allowing us to propose informed solutions for the future. One of the many precedents we studied was actually this by Rafael Moneo. It is the Murcia Town Hall. And it applied the ideology of transparency in conceiving this project in the Cardinal Beluga Square, in the historical center of the city of Murcia. This was realized in 1999, and it successfully communicates and combines the solidity and permanence of civic architecture with the aspirations toward openness and democracy that all governments should seek to communicate. By integrating an unquestionably modern civic building to an inherently classic, flamboyant Baroque setting, Moneo instills the idea that the government is by no means above the church or the people it serves, simply a fundamental body that serves to function its nation, independent yet empathetic of religion. As expressed in exterior, the extension underlines an absence of hierarchy in the institutions of a democratic nation. By directly relating the fenestrations of the landscape and responding to contextual constraints, Moneo highlights the state's unity with the church and its people, increasing their sense of connection. This very process lay example to our scheme of the new Supreme Court. The architectonics of the building is consistent with the element of threes in Philippine architecture. Our modern reinterpretation utilizes three materials: glass, concrete, and bamboo. But it is also drawn about the former colonizers of the Philippines. We capitalized on three elements: the ground, nature, and water. And it is in this that the triune is replete, even in building form, and although cliché, I'm a bit embarrassed about it now, the three blocks are named after our three major islands: Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. The three major islands appear buoyant over a reflective pond, reminiscent of the seas that hold our archipelago together, symbolic of the omnipresence and majesty of justice. Characterized by the solidity of the building's stone cladding, the bold form is reminiscent of the institution's stability, yet humanized by the intricacy of the solihia brise-soleil found in every Filipino home. The value of openness is exemplified by the transparency of the building, and the Freedom Park at the entrance is a processional route to the preamble ground floor that houses public spaces, creating a positive perception in fairness and accessibility to the judicial system. Bamboo and the traditional weave technique is coupled with the use of modern materials in the form of cowl facade to the central block, which housed the main session hall, that would illuminate when a session is in progress, acting as a beacon to guide the decisions to be made within. Within the new en banc session hall, skylights provided natural light into this double-height space, and a mechanical ventilation would be used to control internal temperatures to provide fresh air within the occupied spaces. The marble columns from the old and existing Supreme Court found a new home in this space, supporting the bamboo-lined justice area for the 7 mandates of the Supreme Court. The main lobby is a primary convergence zone for both visitors and employees. The grand bamboo staircase leads to the Public Information Office in the mezzanine and the auditorium on the 2nd level. To the right, a mural celebrating Philippine art and commemorating the history of the Supreme Court was going to be commissioned. At the rear, one will find a bust gallery for the former Supreme Court justices looking out to the water feature and the plaza that will host both the flag raising ceremonies and events. Also in the lobby are the docket, cafe, and the souvenir store. The building was designed with floor-to-ceiling heights to maximize the depth that can be lit by daylight. The interiors of the Dignitary Lounge celebrates locally sourced bamboo from floor to ceiling, glazing offering uninterrupted views towards the water features and beyond. The auditorium is actually fitted with a retractable seating and partitioning, allowing for maximum flexibility in configurations. Local materials play heavy on the internal finishes, with a rapidly renewable material of bamboo, not only chosen for its durability and acoustic performance, but also for its environmental impact and the support for the local industry. As you will have noticed, we were driven by a vision to simultaneously execute the project and introduce major breakthroughs, particularly with the image of identity in mind. In combining local and traditional principles with global design practices, we capitalize on the affordability, strength, and renewability and abundance of bamboo, which is also famed as a construction material of the future. Bamboo has the tensile strength of steel and the compressive strength of concrete. Reinforced bamboo has gone on to replace common building materials in China, Colombia, Germany, Japan, basically all over the world. The rediscovery and utilization of bamboo reflects our own identity as a nation. That is, the reawakening of our own potential as a people that is uniquely Filipino, strong, hardworking, and resilient. Now, my obsession with bamboo would later be manifested in our succeeding work. Oops. A client approached us for a boutique hotel in Palawan, and I saw this as an opportunity to further into the tectonics of architecture and retreat into the primitive and the archaic. Palawan is home to the Tabuan Caves and the site where possibly the oldest Homo sapiens fossil fuels evidence in Southeast Asia, dating up to 47,000 years ago. In the introduction to the archaic man, the term archaic is defined as meaning primal or original. The notion of the primitive finds its most important exploration in the idea of the primitive or the first hut, a theme that has preoccupied architects and philosophers over the ages. The hut then becomes archetypal, and to quote Corbusier, looking at a drawing of such a hut in a book on archaeology, here is a plan of a house, a plan of a temple. There is no such thing as a primitive man. There are only primitive means. The idea is constant, potent from the outset. Another fundamental issue in the modern world is concerned with humankind's ever-changing relationship with nature. If we accept that the world's mythologies are a poignant reflection of the evolution of our inner nature, the collective psyche, we would consider that the Garden of Eden represents an original state of integration and wholeness, a first paradise. Now, the etymological word of natura actually means intrinsic quality and also natus, which means born. The concept of nature as a whole implies that the physical universe and the natural wild environment, unaltered by human intervention, is an evolution to the concept of nature. The modern use of the term suggests the idea of nature as something other, implying that humankind is in some way a separate entity characterized by its apparently unique and prized gift in consciousness. So, to use the garden as a trope of humankind's engagement with the natural world over time, the garden itself represents a liminal place between two worlds, the given and the made. The contribution of architectural intervention and its landscape categorized variously as enclosing, the remembered parcel of an original state and lost paradise, infronting, a demonstration of humankind's dominion over landscape, and merging, in which landscape was returned to the Arcadian paradise, linked to an idealized view of antiquity. It was through this that we began to explore ways in which we could return our structure of this project back to nature. You see, good architecture stands out, but better architecture recedes into its surroundings of nature. Rather than standing out as objects of admiration, the building intensifies the prospect of generating new bonds between nature and people. It was with this line of thought that we later manifested this in a hotel we're working on in Baguio. For the last 15 years, I've spent a portion of the Christmas holidays traveling to the City of Pines, and over time, the population has grown, and so has the number of houses along the mountains. While this has given Baguio a new, unique character, it is a significant departure from the Burnham Master Plan, which advocated strictly controlled growth and development. The physical framework embodied a plan that integrates a road and park systems and a compact garden city for only 25,000 people. Instead, Baguio today is a highly urbanized city with a population of more than 350,000 people, over 10 times more than what was planned. And it is slowly losing its character as a vibrant and green city for residents and visitors alike. Now, rapid urbanization is a reality whether we like it or we like it. Instead of challenging this, we sought to embrace the population boom with a different take, to embrace the fact with a different perspective. In this light, we explored nature as a building material. The building's outer skin is of greenery, a permeable and breathable skin, and we purposely preserved a century-old pine tree on the site and blurred the thresholds between the interior and the exterior. Now, with no bias to the people that we work with, if any of the people I work with are here, you're all my favorite, but this client is truly so admirable. He was a born and bred Ifugao local, and he quit school at the age of 16 and made a living selling bread that he baked himself. He had already moved to La Trinidad by then, and La Trinidad is oftentimes referred to as the food basket of the nation. And my client saw a huge gap in that market. Fast forward to this day, he is the biggest sliced bread supplier in that part of the country. In our research of Baguio and the Mountain Province, we came to learn about the political and cultural dynamics of traditional societies in the Cordilleras and the relationship between social status, wealth, and feasting in various ethno-linguistic groups of the Cordillera. We learned about the Kadangyans, in which they perform a hangan di kinadangyan. I'm so sorry if I pronounced that wrong. But it is a prestige rites aimed at sharing the resources with the lower class. The Ifugao Feasts of Merits were done as a responsibility of the Ifugao elites for the good of the community and for the appeasement of deities and their departed ancestors. Now, the feasts are marked by rituals, chants, dances, and gong playing. The parallelisms of my client and this were uncanny, but also very enlightening. Here he was, ready to retire, looking for a way to give back to his community. We saw the hotel as an extension of his home, a place where he would welcome his guests to enjoy the same retreat to nature that he does. Though I have frequented Baguio one too many times on my family vacations, my team and I literally spent weeks understanding and looking for inspiration. And it is through understanding the primitive, the archaic, the natural, and the sublime that we drew even more design elements that was later manifested in form, giving birth to what the building is today. Now, a little over 2 years ago, the office of the former Manila Mayor, Joseph Ejercito Estrada, reached out for assistance in visioning for the urban regeneration of this incredibly dense city of Manila. Together with WTA Design Studio, Plaza and Partners focused on 10 public sector initiatives to re-inject a sense of growth and vitality into our city. The vision purposes a refocusing on the public sector's projects in the most catalytic and substantial opportunities that can redevelop Manila's touristic and historical image as a cultural heart of our nation. These 10 projects are game changers, and each one of them was chosen for their financial and immediate feasibility, as well as the impact that they would have on both their locality and city as a whole. Ay, joke.
I first came to Manila noong 1969. Manila was a beautiful city then. Walang gaanong mga squatters, walang gaanong mga street dwellers. But eventually, nag-crop up na itong mga problem na ito.
So we've always thought about Manila as this beautiful city, yet nobody seems to see that as being evident. So what we've imagined is we wanted to renew or give Manila a sort of rebirth. What we thought would be the best opportunity would be to create this arts and culture district. All the tourists, they come to Intramuros, and we wanted to give them something more. We want them to wander around Manila.
Importante na magkaroon ng place sa arts and film kasi marami sa ating kapwa artists na nagsistruggle upang ipalaganap ang kanilang talento at saka ang kanilang advokasya gamit ang kanilang sining.
25 taon na po akong nagsiservisyo dito sa Manila Zoo.
The Manila Zoo has always been a vital part of Manila. What we actually propose is to create a 4-hectare public park and turn it into a botanical garden. And with the remaining 1 hectare, what we were doing is we're building the world's first vertical zoo to be the first of its kind in the world.
The Rizal Memorial Complex is one of the most important parts of the city and has been for many, many decades. By opening the Rizal Sports Complex, we will be able to reflect a broader, more inclusive mix of facilities that will cater to the shifting demographics and changing needs of the community.
So my ideal workspace is more of like somewhere where you can actually collaborate and use the space to your own will and to be able to fully use the potential of the space to your own needs and to be able to finish what you need to do.
The economy of the future is smart, efficient, innovative, and collaborative. It is being invented in cities with diverse social interaction, and the Innovation Hub will be a startup accelerator to empower new business ideas.
Pangarap ko, magkaroon tayo ng marami pang mga green spaces dito sa Manila because I want to breathe fresh air.
We want to reintroduce, our public greens. What we're doing is we're opening up most of our parks. We're introducing piazzas to serve as entry points or gateways into these parks and allow people to rediscover actually the greens that they have and insert programs and activities into them so that people will actually come to visit and enjoy, the public open space that they actually have in the city. Barangay halls are something that is very Filipino. Especially in Manila, where maybe in every other street or almost every street, you have a new barangay. And so what we propose is to create a character with these barangay halls, to make them, distinctive landmarks. We're creating modular spaces that come in various sizes, but then they all have the same identity. And at night, when they light up, they serve as lighthouses, for the barangays. And so, they create a sense of security and safety for the people in the barangays.
Nakatira po ako dito sa Malate, 2001 pa po. Sana yung paglaki ng anak ko, maganda na yung paglalakad dito sa Adriatico.
Ang gusto lang namin mangyari, yung makapaglatag kami ng maayos, na hindi na kami na matatanggal.
So we believe what we can do with Divisoria is we can make it a tourist destination. We can make valuable spaces for the people who are actually selling there for the tenants and sort of like improve their situation from a subsistence living into a very desirable retail atmosphere. We found this amazing site that would be one of the few remaining spaces there in Tondo. And what we wanted to do with this, we wanted to create a center for Tondo. And so we're building this housing project where you can actually house 3,000 people in this site, or 3,000 families.
Access to substantial healthcare is one of the most important assets of a community. We are looking to redevelop the main government hospitals around the city, starting with placing a state-of-the-art medical arts facility within the Hospital ng Manila. This new hospital building offers the most advanced healthcare services for the community today and for the future. These 10 projects provide a good cross-section of Manila's developmental needs. Each one provides the rare opportunity for public intervention and acts as anchors that can catalyze change and stabilize their respective communities. Collectively, they have a synergistic effect in turning the city of Manila into the cultural and tourism heart of the nation.
So don't forget, please vote for me. 2020, joke lang. Though it was unfortunately never realized, the video presents to you our ideas for the future and shine a light on the opportunities for us to build the future. Most importantly, it shows that Manila is not just the heritage and birthplace of our nation, but the future of every Filipino. Collectively, the Sulong Maynila Urban Regeneration Plan was to have a synergistic effect on the city of Manila and to turn it into the cultural heart of the city. Now, over the last 5 years of running Plaza Partners, each project has taught us something new with the effect our buildings have on people who encounter them. This has led to several revelations about sustainability, social impact, and the power of communication. The future of designing cities is not about designing beautiful buildings, but buildings with personalities in order to generate bonds with the people who use them. Each project was an opportunity to use architecture to transcend the domain of the physical matter and of the built environment. Each scheme, a response of how we want to live our lives, how we script our own stories and those of others, how we achieve the greater purpose for a better humanity. The buildings that we create will outlive us. They will stand testament to our time. We cannot predict the future, but perhaps we can create spaces with which it can unfold. For as long as we keep an unshakable belief in the power of architecture, an abiding love for the spaces we shape, and a naive notion that better buildings make a better world, we can continue to use timber, mortar, bricks, and steel, both materialized and in theory, to enable and ennoble, because architecture can. Thank you.